Hello, my name is Suzanne and I garden and grow cut flowers for sale in very rural Devon in the UK. And I sell my cut flowers predominantly through my website from a very small growing space. And in this video, it's time to get real and I'm going to talk about a bit of a taboo subject. Nobody really likes talking about these things, but we're going to talk a little bit about money. How much am I spending in order to live my dream? My growing space is small and limited, but it's limited deliberately really as well, because for me, growing cut flowers is a side hustle. So I'm growing on a space which is 14 by 18 meters. I'm doing all of the work here in the garden and making and delivering bouquets of flowers in my spare time. Digital technology and social media have allowed us to produce an almost edited, perfect version of ourselves. It's almost a digital and online version of keeping up with the Joneses. And although this video has been quite hard for me to make because it means bearing, not secrets if you like, but bearing personal information about money and about how much money I spend, I'm hoping to just get real and be honest. I don't want to portray a version of me with you guys that isn't actually accurate. I mean, we're all guilty, particularly on Instagram. I'll probably take 40 photographs and only choose one which I'll consider worthy of going online. And it would be very easy for me to do that with this type of YouTube video as well. You know, add a couple of hundred here on flowers I've sold. But I've chosen not to do that. I've chosen to be honest, to be real, and hoping that it will go some way to helping you make decisions about perhaps a business you already have, whether or not you think you're going to dive all in, which is ever so tempting. You're all a great community and you really encouraged me to make this video. Your comments are always so lovely, and I suppose you've made me confident and comfortable enough to share this video with you. So I thank you for that, and I do hope that you find it helpful or useful in some way. The most important aspects of my little business to take into account when we're talking about money and these figures is that yes, it's on a small space, and number two is it is most definitely a side hustle. So many times I hear people referring to side hustles as side hustles. It doesn't even need to be growing cut flowers, but they're not actually side hustles at all. They're just self-employed people doing self-employed jobs, of which they are their full-time employment. For me, what I mean by a side hustle is that I have another job, which is my full-time income, and then I'm growing and selling cut flowers as an extra added on top of that. I really believe that the more time and yourself that you can invest into a small business or a side hustle, the more you will get out of it. I think you get in what you put out. So if, like me, you're only putting in as much as you can manage, you're only going to get out as much as you can manage. And I think that's definitely reflected in the figures that I'm going to talk about shortly. So currently, as my business model stands, with this definitely being 100% a side hustle, I definitely could not make enough money to sustain me even close. We are a million miles away from making enough money from me selling cut flowers for me to be able to give up my job. It's an impossible situation really, because in order for me to make enough money from selling my cut flowers to give up work, I would have to first give up work. It's like catch 22. And obviously You don't know how long it would be until you started to make a reliable, consistent income for you to live off, especially when you have family and other commitments where you need to make sure you have X amount of money coming into the bank every month. Basically, to give up work to do this 100%, I would be jumping into a complete unknown. For me, where I'm located, I'm in a really rural area with very little foot traffic. This is my personal situation, and this may not apply to you. You could possibly live in a highly populated, an affluent area, and you may find that your side hustle can make you money by running as a side hustle. You may not come across the same hurdles that I do in my very rural part of Devon. So sadly, none of that applies to me. We're definitely not an affluent area, and we're definitely not highly populated. Somebody commented on one of my videos at some point, I can't remember which video or when or whom even, but they asked me how long it took for my business to become established in my area. And the truth is, it's not. Nearly all of my sales come through my website, and then nearly all people who don't live anywhere near where I live. They all live elsewhere, and they are ordering flowers to gift to people who do live in my area. Quite often, in fact, I will even be selling flowers from my website to people who live in completely different continents. For me and the business model that I have and operate, if I did not invest time and money into my website, I would make very few sales. So the first costs I'm going to talk about is the infrastructure, really, having the actual plot ready for growing and selling flowers. Bearing in mind the infrastructure I'm talking about is a small infrastructure, and if you're planning on becoming a full-time flower farmer, you probably are going to be growing on a much larger area, and therefore you will need to increase the costs by whatever percentage is necessary for the size of growing space that you have. The idea here is for me to highlight all of the costs that I incurred before I had even grown or sold a single flower. I think the most important thing that you need in your infrastructure is somewhere to grow. Some of us are lucky, you may have a backyard, quite a large garden. If you're like me, you've got animals, so it was easy just to steal a bit of grazing. But it is important to consider that if you are paying a mortgage or you're paying rent, that you need to consider that a percentage of those costs is rent or mortgage on the land. So if you're running a business, those costs need to be included. For me, for my little side hustle business, those costs are not included in the figures I'm going to give, but I wanted to bring it up because obviously you cannot grow flowers without somewhere to grow them. A lot of growers out there, and I can't understand how they manage. For me, an essential cost is fencing of the growing space, because I don't see how you can grow when all the wildlife can come in and eat your plants. And for me as well, sheep, goats, horses, they would all get eaten. So for me, I've got the land now. The first thing I needed to do was to fence it, and obviously I've developed. The area has grown over the last couple of years, so then there were extra costs involved in that. But I managed to reduce costs a lot on my fencing, and that is because my gate was made of bits of pallet timber that we had laying around, and we did the work ourselves, which definitely reduces the costs. So the costs for me to fence off my cut flower patch, I already had one existing boundary fence line, so I only actually had to do the other fences that joined onto that. And because we did the fencing ourselves, we didn't have to put any labour into this. Although if you want to run growing cut flowers as a business, then you do need to pay yourself, you do need to put labour costs in. But for me at the moment, this business is not paying anybody anything. It's just covering its own back, if you like. So we only needed a small amount of fencing, so for that we used a roll of stock netting, which was £50, and I can't remember exactly how many posts we used, but I know the cost of the fencing came out at £170, and that included the rabbit netting that I put around the bottom as well. But as I say, that's just materials, that's not any cost for any labour. And we made the gate out of bits of wood we already had lying about. The other thing we had to add to the fencing, which probably is not essential to everybody, but because of the aspects and conditions of my growing space, I did need to invest in a windbreak. And actually I was quite lucky because the one roll that I bought managed to do a windbreak on the 3 sides that I needed to, and it was only £35. Although I have now since found you can get the cost down on that by buying the mesh they use on scaffolding from the builders' sites. That comes in ever so slightly cheaper. So next time I need a roll, I'll make sure I do a bit more research. That brings my fencing up to £205. And another cost for me that was definitely essential, but again I see some growers who don't really have the same issues I have, is staking. And over the years that I've been growing, I've invested on various different methods of staking, and I only wish I had have just, rather than spending that money on things that were inferior, I wish I'd have just spent more money in the beginning. Now the method that I use is to actually cut up pieces of stock fencing and make sure I leave a sharp edge on the end and stick them in the ground. And then I also have pigtail stakes along the side of the bed where I can put an extra line in just for when the plants have grown much taller. That just helps stop them falling out, because my walkways are very narrow. If you're designing a cut flower patch, you probably should have wider walkways really, but in the top part of my garden they're only 50 centimetres, so you can see if the plants grow in on both sides, you really can't get through. My staking is an ongoing project, so I actually haven't yet got all the materials to do the whole garden in this way, but so far I've used 3 rolls of stock netting, and they were £50 each, so that's £150. And so far I have 100 of the pig stakes, and they came in at £120. And then I'm also quite good at recycling, so where I've not got enough of those pig stakes, I've actually been using metal from my original old and destroyed polytunnel, as well as bamboo canes, and honestly in some areas I've just used branches out of the hedge. But obviously that is until I can sort of afford to do it all with the staking method I've just described, because it makes life so much easier. And although these materials are costly, I have to get it in my head that not something that I'm going to have to be paying for every growing season. If you are intending to grow your plants from seed, which is what I do, obviously you can buy plugs if you so prefer, but for me I need somewhere to start seedlings to propagate, to germinate, and I managed to save costs again in this area by searching local selling pages. So I managed to get my greenhouse for free, although we did have to dismantle it and then re-erect it, and then we did have to replace, well, it came with lots of glass missing, so we had to buy the glass. And then you all know I had a lot of problems with my gravel floor, with the voles, so we then have had to go on and concrete the floor as well. So with the glass and the concrete, because again I'm not adding anything in for us going and collecting the greenhouse or putting it up again, I'm just absorbing those costs. I start some of my seeds quite early on in the year in February, and my greenhouse isn't really providing ideal conditions for that. So I also invested in some heated propagators and some grow lights, which again I did manage to save money by looking on selling sites to get these. And my grow lights and heated propagators, I've got 2 small, just domestic size, I'm on a small scale, 2 domestic sized heated propagators and 3 grow lights at a cost of £80. Now obviously you've don't just need somewhere to grow the seeds, you need something to grow them in. And I know a lot of people favour soil blocking, so you could invest in a soil blocker and save money there, or you may want to grow in cells or flats. I do tend to use a lot of recycled pots, which people are throwing away. I mean, I get given bags of them. And yes, some of them are a bit damaged, but they work fairly well. But I do also buy some really quite sturdy cells, which I reuse. Just taking one season as an example, I may spend about £20 on cell trays, which isn't a big number really. A bigger number is how much I'll spend on a season in compost, which is usually around about the £85 figure. A lot of you who watch my channel know that I did splash out and go ahead and buy myself a polytunnel, which again isn't necessarily essential until we move on with my figures and realise how much I spent on flowers from other growers. So hopefully having a polytunnel will mean that at the beginning of the season and the end of the season, where I often struggle to fulfil orders, hopefully I will now be able to do that and then reduce the costs involved in me buying these extra flowers. So my polytunnel is small, but I have a small space, so I didn't want to put a huge tunnel in it. So my polytunnel is 8 foot by 20 foot, and actually that's a good growing size for me, especially because I'm limited on time. Again, we save money by putting the polytunnel up ourselves, but again, we've not paid ourselves for doing that. But my polytunnel, I thought it was a good price actually. I was happy to pay it for what it was, and that was £835. If you're beginning a cut flower growing or gardening journey, even, oh, we've got the dog now, you may not already have forks and spades and trowels and watering cans and hose pipes. Those are all things that I already owned personally because I've always had a keen interest in gardening. But I just wanted to point out that those are costs that you may have if you're starting right at the beginning and you aren't already fortunate enough to have them. Also, the other thing to take into consideration there is perhaps your growing area is 2 miles down the road, and you may have forks, spades, shovels, etc. at home, but do you want to cart them to your growing space every time you go there, or do you need to invest as a business in buying a separate spade for home and a separate spade for your growing space? I think one of the mistakes I made in the beginning, I know I've touched on it in previous videos, is researching but not taking into account the differences between me growing cut flowers as a side hustle in a small garden space and a flower farmer. So I actually did spend money originally on drip irrigation and on weed fabric, and then actually realised that they were costs I didn't really need to make. But obviously if you are thinking of growing on a really large scale, then it's a personal preference, I think, on if you decide whether or not you need those things to grow. So we've already spent a lot on our infrastructure, and I'm yet to even mention seeds, bulbs, plants. But before we get to those things, and floristry sundries, I think we ought to talk a little bit about some of the business costs involved. I intended to sell at winter markets, and that's in the run-up to Christmas. It's not very many. It's usually only 3 or 4 markets in November or December. But in order to be able to do that, it does mean that I have to have a PDQ machine. Mine is a Zettel, which links up with PayPal. Mine cost me £70, but then there is a 2.5% transaction fee, which is something to consider when you're doing your pricing, because obviously what your customer pays you will then be a lot less when it finally comes into your bank account. Not only did I need the card machine, but I also needed to pay for these markets. Very lucky, these were really inexpensive markets, and actually I think they were even less than £10, because I think 4 of the markets came in at £30. I also have insurance to sell my cut flowers and market, and that is also £70. I think it's quite good to have some branding. So I did also have a few signs and things made, and some sort of things to help me display my goods. So I spent £60 on sort of creating my market stall. For me, one of my biggest costs in order to sell my cut flowers, but I think I've already mentioned in the video that if I didn't fork out this amount of money, I probably wouldn't sell hardly any flowers at all. And that is my website, and it is costly. So my website and URL combined are costing me £485, but there is a but, that's not for 1 year, so that is for a 3-year period. It's still an eye-watering amount of money, but honestly, my business just really wouldn't exist in any form without spending that. I was a bit shocked when I looked up the next cost, because I hadn't realised I'd spent so much money in this area. And yeah, this is not essential by any means, but for me it was really important to have some sort of training. If I'm going to be selling flowers to people and expecting them to pay for them, I wanted to make sure that I sort of had some rough idea what I was doing, and that people would be happy with the product that they were buying from me. So I couldn't believe how much I spent on training, but actually I have spent, I don't even know if I can bring myself to say it, £811 on training courses. And I'm not even including any books that I've bought in this, because those books are sort of in my personal bookcase and I don't really consider them a business cost. But I've probably spent at least £100 on books, but we're not going to put those in. But anyway, £811 on training courses. So the costs are piling up, and we haven't even really touched on sort of running costs. You know, things like my phone, which my answer machine message is a business answer machine message, but it's also my private phone. Using my vehicle for deliveries, you know, things like water. I do try and capture lots of rainwater where I can, but I do occasionally need to use mains. Another thing that I've done that definitely is not essential is I've registered my trademark. I don't know if this video is getting really boring now. I don't know, there's something about this topic that is just really depressing. But obviously, if you're going to be selling flowers, not that we've even bought any bulbs or seeds yet, but you're going to need sundries, floristry sundries. So whatever flower products you're going to be selling, there are some things you're definitely going to need. You're going to need buckets, you're going to need snips. But then the other things that you need in terms of floristry sundries will really depend on what types of products you're selling to people. You know, are you going to be selling flowers in jars, or are you just going to be doing wrapped bunches? Or you may even decide that you're going to be doing event work, and you might need, you know, pin frogs and ribbons and things like that. And so what I've done is I've taken a floristry sundries order that I made, not in the current tax year, but in the previous tax year, just as an example. And actually mine's a mix of both retail and event things in there. I can't remember them off the top of my head, so I've written the order down. So I had ordered some branded stickers, just with my logo on, some flower boxes, which I use for my sort of larger bouquets. I'd ordered 200 metres of craft paper, tissue paper, 10 small vases, a packet of wrist corsage bracelets. I actually use them to make dried flower wrist corsages, which I then sell over the winter. And I also ordered a roll of ribbon, and this is just an example. For me, that the total cost of that invoice was £85, but I should point out you can get those things cheaper for sure. I know that. I don't need anybody to comment to me, oh, you can get that. But the reason I spend more on those things is because for me, the sustainability of the items is really important, because I am selling my products as sustainable and environmentally friendly. And not only that, I like to support smaller businesses. So I know if I went on Amazon, I could get it all cheaper, basically. So that, again, is personal preference. But for me, that's what an order like that would cost. Okay, so we've got pretty much everything we need now, haven't we? Oh, except I haven't bought any seeds or bulbs or tubers. How much is that going to cost? Now, I'm not very restrained when it comes to plant shopping. So this figure, I'm sure you could all definitely decrease and improve upon. But again, I'm going to take my last tax year as an example. So it will include every seed I bought, every bulb I bought, every tuber, every corm, every plant in that tax year. And again, it's a pretty eye-watering number when you consider I'm growing on such a small space. I should really work out percentage-wise how much I'm spending on like 1 square metre, because it'll be way more than I should be. Basically, in my last tax year, I spent £471 for my tiny little cut flower patch on seeds, bulbs, tubers, corms and plants. So now you want to know how much I spent. We've done the infrastructure, we've got our floristry supplies, we've got our seeds and bulbs, we've got our compost, we've got our greenhouse, we've got our pots. How much did I spend in order to be able to sell cut flowers? So I spent, drum roll please, £3,727, or at least that's what I thought, until I remembered another cost, and this is the one I really want to try and avoid next year if I can. So on top of the £3,727, just checking it was £27, I then actually spent £475 on other British flowers and foliage where possible from very local growers, and failing that, other places in the UK. And I had no idea I'd spent that much, but that's where I accept orders that probably I should decline. And actually, I don't accept every order that comes through. There are many that I decline. Usually more because I actually don't have time to fulfill them, rather than the fact that I don't have the flowers available to me. And the dream is that one day, yes, it would be a business and that I would be able to pay myself. But at the moment, I can only manage the size of cut flower garden that I've got with the time that I've got. And as I say, sometimes I have to turn orders down, and that is just the reality of my life, but it doesn't mean to say that it's the reality of yours. And some of the positive points to remember here are that a lot of these things will last me more than a season. You know, my website, my polytunnel, my training, those things have been an initial cost, but I'm not going to have those every year. And of course, this leads us on to the fact that in the end, I did sow those seeds, I did germinate them, I did grow those flowers, and I did sell them. So we're going to talk about how much money I made from selling them. And again, we're not going to talk about this current tax year, because I haven't finished it yet, it's still ongoing, I've still got all my Christmas sales to do. So I'll talk about the last tax year, which was 2023 into 2024, and obviously my current one at the moment is 2024 into 2025. So I made £3,200 worth of sales on my small little patch, very, very part-time. I definitely could have increased this if I had had more time, been able to attend more markets, been able to push my flowers harder, and to accept all of those offers that I turned down. So I strongly believe, and that's why I keep doing this, that it is possible to make money from selling cut flowers, but I do think it's much harder if you can't commit to it full time. For those of you following along with your pen, your paper and your calculator, you will have already worked out that I've either A, done my maths wrong, which is a possibility, but more importantly that I didn't make any money, and not only did I not make money, but that actually I am £1,000 in debt. And obviously if you put a real-time figure on it for the fact that I haven't paid myself at all, then the debt is absolutely massive. But in terms of money in the bank, then there's that £1,000. But I don't consider £1,000 too bad when I think that I spent 800 and a bit pounds on training, and I spent, 800 and a little bit more on my polytunnel. Those are costs that they're there for a long time. You know, the training, hopefully I'll remember it all, and the polytunnel should see me through for years and years to come. And the same with a lot of the other infrastructure costs. They're things that I can continue to use growing season after growing season after growing season. Moving forward, it means that it's not going to take me too long to make sure that the polytunnel and all the infrastructure is paid for. I just need to pay that £1,000 out of this year's income. And as things look, as the business started year on year on year, I do make more money from selling my cut flowers, but I'm always going to be limited because I cannot dedicate the time to take my business to the next level. So my income's always going to get to a point where that's the most I can do. And then, as I've said, the only thing to do then is just keep that as a side hustle. That's how much money you're going to make, or you have to make that decision to go for that full time, and then hopefully be able to make more money again. Where I am in my growing journey at the moment is we're still a side hustle. We're going to be a side hustle for some time, but I would love to think that at some point in the future that I could perhaps, maybe this could be my 75% job, and that my other job could perhaps become part-time. It's always great to have a dream, isn't it? Thank you so much for watching. Please do let me know, were you inspired or put off growing cut flowers? I really hope that you've been inspired, and let me know in the comments, was this video a little bit dull, boring? Would you perhaps prefer me to steer clear of this type of content and go more on with the growing and the bouquets and the tours and that sort of thing? That's useful to know for me as a creator. If you did like the video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to follow my growing and cut flower journey, then of course you can subscribe to my channel. And if you'd like to contribute towards the making of these videos, then you can buy me a coffee, and the link for coffee buying is in the description for the video. And for those of you that have bought me coffees, thank you so much, very much appreciated. It really does mean a lot and really does help me forge out a bit of time for making these videos. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.